under our new climate law, I was surprised to discover that the home that I grew up in and the elementary school that I went to are in one of our state's overburdened communities because of the proximity to the airport. And it drove home for me the importance, not just for our region's economy, not just for our aerospace economy, but also for the people who live in this region to benefit from advances in clean air and clean energy and the opportunities to create jobs and economic prosperity while we make sure that those kids growing up in my neighborhood that go to that elementary school today can breathe cleaner air. So that's why we're here today to talk about the future of sustainable aviation fuel. And we've assembled, I think, in the history of PNWER, the best possible panel to address a topic of such complexity. We have some great experts here. We have Bruce Fleming, who is the CEO of Montana Renewables, who's creating sustainable aviation fuel in our region. We have Ryan Spees from Alaska Airlines, the managing director for sustainability, our region's premier airline partner on this. We have Tim Zank, managing director at Earth Finance, who's helping assemble a Cascadia coalition around this. And then we have, again, the two best airports of the region, YVR, do we say the YVR and SCA are here? Wendy Avis, which has to be the best name for someone that works in an airport. Wendy Avis, the director of climate and environment at the Vancouver Airport Authority, and our very own Stephanie May, the climate protection program manager at the Port of Seattle. And of course, we call it SCA right now. So we are excited to have this great group of experts with us, and we're going to do some opening remarks and then look forward to a couple of staged managed questions. And then please use the app to populate with your questions as well to give us a rich dialogue. So we have a pre-order to the opening statements. So Tim, if you want to start us out with some opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Senator Leos. I really appreciate that. Hi, everybody. My name is Tim Zank. As Marco said, I'm the managing director of Earth Finance. Been involved in sustainable aviation and renewable fuels since 2007. I worked at a company called Sapphire Energy and had the pleasure of leading a team of folks who developed some early concept fuels that were used on Continental Airlines in the day, 2.5 hours around Houston, and JAL Airlines from algae and jatropha. And we produced those fuels from those materials. And we really just wanted to demonstrate the efficacy of the use of new types of feedstocks that could be put into an aircraft that they could use safely. Safety is the #1 issue on any aircraft, of course. And so that's kind of the background I have in this topic, and have been involved in that arena ever since. And I just want to quickly point out that uniquely in our region, from British Columbia all the way into Montana and Idaho and Oregon, we have a unique opportunity here because we are the center of aviation innovation in the United States. We happen to live in a wood basket of unique types of biomass and feedstocks that both flow from Canada, from canola to woody biomass and other materials in the region. So we have feedstock availability. And then we have a unique way of getting things done in our region that is tantamount to like being a leader in success. And one of the things the legislature did this year was they appropriated $10 million to create the Cascadia SAF Accelerator Institute. And another $10 million was raised from private donors to really create an ecosystem and build scaffolding around the production of sustainable aviation fuel in our region. We'll go into more of that in detail, but there's a lot of opportunity in the region for us to control our own destiny around fuels, from whether it's renewable fuels like renewable diesels or sustainable aviation fuels. Our region has a unique and a very large opportunity to support that. And the last point I'll make is that we are a refining region. Washington State is the 5th largest refiner in the United States. We produce a lot of fuels. And so we have also the workforce and technology expertise in the region to do that too. So that's my introduction. And who should I turn the mic over to? Bruce.
Thanks, Tim. I got one. Hi, everybody. Bruce Fleming. I'm the CEO of Montana Renewables. There it is. There are a lot of people in this room that have put a lot of good thought into policy and where this is all headed. I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to make it real. lower left-hand corner, you can see part of a pickup truck. That'll help you with scale. We've been operating since 2022. We make renewable hydrogen that we use in our process internally. It's net zero. We make renewable LPG or propane, if you'd rather. Anybody want to fuel their municipal bus fleet, have at it. Mostly we make renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel. So this is like a mini refinery. It just happens that we put in things that grew in acreage. They might be cows, they might be vegetable oils, seed oils. And otherwise, it's just an energy mixture. We rearrange the molecules. I'm a chemical engineer. We can convert any molecules to any other molecules if you put enough effort into that. So we simply follow the market and we follow the regulations. Here's 3 keys to the world of SAF. 1, it's here. 2, it's not technically at risk. The technologies that are kicking around, the mainstream technologies are proven. At the moment, according to Argus anyway, their project list of who's producing, all of the SAF in the world is using the same technology we are. There's literally a couple of dozen plants, so that's proved. If I back up about 50 years to the start of my career, I worked for Mobile Research and Development Corporation. We commercialized alcohol to fuels in New Zealand. So, you hear about ATJ, alcohol to jet. That's not new. These are possible. So that turns into the second point, which is, well, what does the customer want? The customer wants energy that is safe, clean, and reliable. They don't talk much about price up until you say, here's the new higher price. And then everybody's like, well, you should pay for it. I shouldn't have to. So the experimentation that is underway is not around technical risk. It's not around, this being a better fuel for the future. It is around cost leveling. So I know there's 2 airlines, there are airlines in the room. There's 2 airport authorities coming up and 1 airline to my right. I'm not going to speak for them, but I'm going to say that is a tough business to be in. That is a commodity business. It's incredibly high capital. Margins are thin. Things that happen that are disruptive are real problems for those operating companies. And I don't believe, I'm willing to be corrected on this, that any one airline is going to go out and say, I'm happy to pay twice as much for my fuel to make a point. They can't do that. They won't be able to stay in business. So the policy question is real simple. How do you make SAF available at the same cost to everybody that's going to adopt it? The Europeans have settled that. They slapped a volume mandate on. So whatever airport you fuel your jet at in Europe, it's going to cost the same for everybody that fuels there. Level playing field. Airlines, we could argue the definition of fine, but I'm going to say they did just fine during my professional career when crude oil was $10 a barrel, and they did just fine when crude oil was $100 a barrel. The point is the level playing field, not the absolute price. So if you'll accept that, it's about policy and incentives that make it cost the same for all of the participants.
All right. Well, he just did all my work for me. I don't have to say anything else. No, my name is Ryan Spees. I'm the Managing Director of Sustainability Alaska. The points that have been made already really define sort of the ecosystem that we're in thinking about sustainable aviation fuel. From my perspective, it's one lever that we can pull as an airline to decarbonize. It is the biggest and most important lever in my view, also over the next 10 to 15 years. And I'll tell you why that is. All right, we really look at decarbonization in 5 levers. The first is just flying more efficiently. How do we get you into the plane, off the ground, into the air, and back down safely again as fast and as efficiently as possible? Even if we are the absolute best in the industry at efficiency, the best I can do is like 3 or 4% savings. Okay, so that's as best as I can do with the current system. The next lever is new planes. Boeing was mentioned. Every new Boeing plane that we bring on, the MAX is 15 to 25% more efficient than the ones that we retire. Fantastic, right? That's a huge chunk of my decarbonization journey, but they last for 30 years, right? We're putting these planes in and we expect them to be there long past our net zero goals, long past all these other goals. And we are still using older, less efficient planes until we want to retire them. So that's not the only answer. And so then becomes SAF. And why is SAF important? It's safe. It's a drop-in fuel. The infrastructure exists to get fuel to our planes. It burns in our engines just the same. So those are all good. We're talking about decarbonization from the life cycle of how these fuels are created. Amazing. What was mentioned, right? We know technologies that work, but today less than 1% of the world's fuel is SAF. The world's jet fuel is SAF. How do we scale that? Price was mentioned. Absolutely. Who here buys airplane tickets and does not look at the price? Can I direct you to alaskaair.com, please? Right? No, of course, it's super competitive. And just as was mentioned, we can't go out and just go buy 100% SAF and make our ticket prices really expensive. We'd never be able to compete. And so a level playing field is a great debate that we would love to have. I personally believe that that is a big challenge. But also, if you go to Europe and you ask those airlines over there how they feel about it, they have these volume mandates. And so the price raises to the very ceiling that it can be. So while we do have voluntary options to buy SAF here, and we're leading US carriers in terms of per flight SAF amounts, the voluntary part is because there's some carrot, and over there, there's some stick. And what we're paying over here is cheaper than what they're paying over there. I really would love to see a mix of both, to be quite honest, because I think that would be really interesting to see how that market dynamic plays out. But that is the challenge that we're facing today, is these costs and also the technologies too. The technologies we're talking about that are mostly used in SAF around the world are these HEFA feedstocks, so oils, fats, greases. As good as Americans are at eating French fries and potato chips and then using that oil to make jet fuel, there's not going to be enough, even for us. And so how do we scale things like alcohol to jet or power to liquid or woody biomass, these new other technologies and feedstocks that can grow the industry? That's the things that we're investing in and trying to figure out, because right now we need more. We need it at a lower price, of course, and we need to scale quickly.
All right, over to me as the first airport. Yeah, so I don't know, growing up with the name Avis. So when I was a little girl and I would fall off my bike or whatever, and I would say, "Oh, it hurts." And my dad would say, "We're not allowed to say it hurts." Because we're Avises. I know, my dad was a vice principal. So yeah, and but I'm gonna say, I grew up tough when we weren't allowed to say it hurts. And I think, I think there's things about decarbonizing aviation that are tough and require us to dig in. I started my career as a climate change scientist for the first sort of 10 years, and I'm working in policy. And I chose to work in aviation because I believe in the power of connecting people. I believe in what aviation gives to us in the world and helping us understand each other, understand different cultures, and visit family and friends. And so that's the industry that I've chosen to work in. YVR, for those of you who are not familiar, we are the second busiest airport in Canada, located on unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam people. And we have a sustainability and friendship agreement with Musqueam. And I am incredibly grateful and thankful that I get to experience the teachings of the Musqueam people. And so when I think about what we do at the airport, it's about protecting the air and the land and the water, not only for this generation, but for generations to come. When I think about the role of the airport, I really think that we are that hub of kind of the connectivity. And when I look at SAF, we're the place that can bring together the ecosystem of SAF, from the suppliers to the airlines to the passenger, incredible interface with the passenger as they move through our terminal, to provincial government, to federal government, and kind of helping be that catalyst and that facilitator for bringing together the ecosystem. So some of the things we're doing at YVR, our SAF strategy is really focused on 3 areas. First, supply. So we are working on how to get supply of SAF going in British Columbia. In the region is great, so that we don't have to move it very far. We would like to see SAF production in British Columbia. Also working on the demand and the demand signals. So we have launched a low carbon jet fuel incentive program. And so we are providing airlines, I meant to look it up, 75 cents a liter, sorry. $2 a gallon, I think that is, to airlines when they uplift SAF anywhere in British Columbia to help with that price differential. And we are working on communications, so working on developing communications for the passengers. And we talked about FIFA, really excited about the opportunity during FIFA. I think, rightly so, the carbon footprint of that event will be in the media and will be talked about in civil society. And this is our opportunity to talk about SAF and talk about decarbonizing aviation, to let people know that we take it seriously. We realize the impact aviation has on the climate, and we are part of the solution to the climate crisis.
All right, and I'm Stephanie Mine, the Climate Program Manager at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. You can call it CTAC in this room. I won't tell anyone in our communications department, but it's also SEA Airport, recently rebranded. And fun fact, I also came from a climate change science background, worked with Wendy 25 years ago at Environment Canada. So I guess I haven't strayed that far. And really, at SEA Airport, we followed a similar sort of path of exploration. What's unique is this airport is owned and operated by the Port of Seattle, which has an economic development mission. And many airports can just sort of sit back and say, well, we don't buy the fuel, it's the airlines that buy the fuel. We wish you well, and good luck. We'd really love to see this fuel, and maybe applaud when a grant is given. But we really sort of we examined the landscape about 10 years ago and said, well, what could we as an airport do really in the economic development side of this? So we began that work with first an infrastructure study, because while we have a common pipeline and infrastructure going into the airport, if you're bringing in, or if the SAF production facility is somewhere else in that ecosystem, you still need to find a way to integrate that. So that was one of the first things we did. And then from there, we've also done studies of the feedstocks that are available in the region to bring that to the airport. We did a partnership with King County, who owns a landfill that's nearby that is scheduled to close now in a decade. But we were looking at, well, what are the options for that municipal solid waste? And if that landfill is reaching capacity, where could that waste go? And could that waste be turned into sustainable aviation fuel? So we've been examining a lot of the things that we can do here locally. And then I'd say the real, the force that we've kept steady, the drumbeat that we've kept steady is really on policy, because that is where we think we could do a lot in terms of the incentives. Unlike the Canadian airports and other European airports, the FAA restricts our ability to use our funding for incentives. So we can't do the $2 per gallon incentive like YVR is doing. We're restricted from that federally. So we've had to do a lot of other things to get creative about what we can do, and really looking to state policy to do that. And then finally, one of the things I'd also point out is, even though you might think of like the reason why an airport would really want to reinforce the SAF message, because it's a climate change issue, it is also an air quality issue. Sustainable aviation fuel at higher concentrations actually reduces the amount of ultrafine particulate coming from the engines and the sulfur emissions. So for airport communities, it's also a really important investment. And I'll leave it there.
This is a really wonderful introduction, and I think we heard loud and clear the technology exists. We have airlines and airports that want to buy it, and yet less than 1% of global aviation fuel is SAF. So that speaks to there clearly being some challenges in the supply chain, the production chain. I think it'd be helpful maybe if each of you, from your particular perspective, could talk about what do you see as one of the biggest challenges facing the supply chain, and what is a potential solution out there? And we can sort of start in whatever order you want to go.
Well, I'll kick off because I'm operating the supply chain. And let me ask, is there anybody in here from the greater Minneapolis-St. Paul SAF hub by any chance? Not seeing a hand. I'm going to point to that, and I'll tell you why in a second. But if you start with the energy transition that's kind of dominated the public conversation for a decade now, just cross out the word renewable. You don't have to say renewable energy. The whole energy infrastructure is vast and complex and has enormous amounts of in-place distribution and conveyancing activities. So in In fossil fuels, that's called petroleum pipelines. And we can ship a gallon of fuel around on pipelines for a couple of pennies. All of the renewable fuels are moving by rail car. They're moving by rail car when they come from the seed crushers that make the oils that we use, or when they come from the waste products from on-purpose ethanol or the animal protein value chain. And rail cars, instead of a couple cents, are a couple of dimes. So, and then you got to repeat that when you ship the product the other way. 50 cents or more per gallon is going into the railroads, because the point of production and the point of consumption are in different places. So this isn't rocket science. So the Greater Minneapolis St. Paul SAF Hub did a really good job. It's a mini PNWER, if I can do that. They had all the stakeholders in the room, and the Department of Energy invited me to join the meeting. They were going on. They were really well organized, and I was super impressed. And they were talking about SAF at the airport 4 years from now. And I said, "Can I have a microphone? Would you like some next week?" And the first thing that happened was somebody wanted to argue with me. "You don't understand, this and this and this." And I, "Oh, can I show you the photo? Like, would you like some next week?" And so I think one of the short-term barriers is people don't know what's possible. They don't know why things are the way they are now, and they don't know where it ought to wind up later when it is efficient. So the beauty of PNWER is it's going to have all of this activity, and we're bootstrapping this. You got to go from the farm, transport to the seed crusher. You got to take the oil from the crusher and transport it to me. I'm going to make it into products. Those have to be transported again. You get the picture. Transport, transport, transport. If we do all that locally, there is a lot of money available right now that can be otherwise applied to, for example, the last mile problem on the airfield into the wing. So I think, if you've ever heard the word locavore, you ever go to a restaurant and they've gathered all this, Smith's farm down the road is growing the potatoes and so on. That's the near-term future of renewable energy. It's got to be. And, it's totally wasted motion to be shuffling this stuff all over the country. And by the way, the railroads are not happy when they hit capacity and bog down, just like what happens when the airlines hit capacity and bog down a little bit. So, I think there's a very, very obvious direction. Now, the talk before this one was on hydrogen. If we just cross out the word hydrogen and repeat that talk, you've got the essence of it. There's a lot going on. It's happening very locally and tactically. Connecting those things up and getting alignment among those stakeholders is going to be the way forward. We simply already did it. Is that scalable? No, there's not 100 more used refineries that you can do what we did with. So you move on to the next phase, and the next phase is new capital. Somebody's got to provide the money. And it's pretty funny when you say, "This is great, everybody's all aligned, let's pass the hat," and the hat comes back around and there's nothing in it. So this is back to government policy again. Government policy is trying to organize itself globally to where we get the end user to help pay for the thing that we all said we wanted, which is the clean energy transition. And if you can organize that so the right people are choosing to pay more for the ticket because they can offset the carbon emissions, this is going to run on a set of rails. It already is. You're looking at the photo. There will be more of this. The experimentation will go on for a while. There's room for everybody. I think it might be 0.1%, not a full percent globally. We've got a long, long way to go.
Bruce sat at the front of the class and gave us, I think, 3 or 4 barriers. So the rest of you can only give us one barrier and solution. So we can continue on to whoever wants to jump on sort of barriers next. Tim, what's the biggest barrier and solution?
I guess I want to say the biggest barrier is policy at this stage, even though we've done a lot of policy and this state is leading in many respects. I think it's the policy that doesn't exist at the federal level any longer, or it doesn't exist to the degree it needs to really support what states like Washington are doing. And so policy is super important. I think though, looking beyond the next 10 or 20 years, we need to open up some new feedstocks, and we need to open up some technology that are technically viable and techno-economically viable. And so we need to look to making some investments and being able to have an additional additional lump of new feedstocks that can be refined in different types of refineries. So there's a number of barriers, but I would say that those are the two things that I would nail it on.
Yeah, I think both of those come down to the ultimate thing, which is bringing down the price. That is what has to happen. Right now, we cannot bear the additional cost, and I think we buy Montana Renewables through an intermediary. We get a great price, but it's still a price that we can't absorb ourselves. So what we do is we go to our guests. Sorry, I don't know why this keeps coming out. We go to our guests and we say, if you'd like to buy sustainable aviation fuel for your next flight or to help us in the system, we're going to award you EQM. So if you want to become an MVP and MVP Gold, 75K, we're going to help you get there by helping us buy SAF. Now, that's a very small percentage of people that do it, even here in the Pacific Northwest, where we really believe this is an important thing. And so the other way we do it is we engage corporations like Microsoft, Amazon, Autodesk, that have business travel and they want to reduce their emissions because other companies believe that this is important as well. So they pay us to then help us buy sustainable aviation fuel. That pool is only so deep. There are only so many corporates that want to spend that money to reduce their emissions of their employees traveling. But that's how we're bootstrapping it today. To me, again, that pool is only so deep. The barrier is next is policy and a level playing field. Those things really do matter. This latest bill, which we can get into, I hope, does not help that situation.
I don't know if I have a new barrier, so I'm just going to give you a I was going to say maple flavored, a Canadian, Canadian kind of view. So and we are a jet fuel importer. So BC, so we which seems kind of strange to me, given the resources that we have, but we are a jet fuel importer. And so now when we add the complication of SAF, then on top of that, that adds to the complexity. I think we haven't had at the federal level the support that has been seen south of the border. And so I think for our airlines and for looking at when they're purchasing SAF, there's a big demand in Europe. There's a big demand, in the US, south of the border. So not only are we paying a premium, we're paying extra on that, to get it kind of into Canada. And so I think that speaks to where our federal government is. I think it speaks to having, again, as we talked about, that level policy playing field for it, because I think, British Columbia is a leader. We have a low carbon fuel policy. Jet fuel is in it, but we're the only jurisdiction in Canada that has that. And so I really feel for airlines who are landing at these, different airports, around the world and trying to deal with this policy complexity, and let alone our kind of, our Canadian airports, which are servicing, a large geographic area with a small population. So just a little bit kind of what the challenges mean for us.
I guess other than echoing the policy barrier, I think one of the things, I guess, that we'll need to think about as we're addressing this policy issue and the incentives is that in order for us to get the scale, the amount, the volume of SAF that we really need to decarbonize at the scale that we want to, we're going to have to unlock other feedstocks. Right now, we've been really looking at those used cooking oils because they're also using the same process as the refineries. But as you look more to the power to liquids, they're very expensive. So to make a gallon of SAF is a very different price tag than to make a gallon of SAF from used cooking oil. And so I think we really need to think a lot about, what it takes to also scale up all of these different feedstocks.
This is a wonderful snapshot of the challenges. I think 4 of the 5 of you mentioned policy, so it might make sense to talk about policy. And we've got some audience questions coming. Please feel free to submit some more. When we think about the policy opportunities that exist, what kind of frameworks or incentives are we seeing? We've heard about what YVR is doing. We've heard a little bit about Europe. Are there other policy frameworks we should be looking at and considering, both frameworks and incentives to advance the industry? So we've all identified policy. what are some of those silver bullets that might help us down that pathway? Ryan, do you want to start us out?
Yeah, sure. So, the framework that existed at the federal level until a few weeks ago was an incentive for production. And there was a clear divide between, there was the $1.70 up to $1.75 to produce clean fuels. And it was up to $1 to produce renewable diesel. And I'm sure we can learn about the difference in producing those two, but everything that I understand is that renewable diesel is cheaper to produce. So that's why you have a differential. That differential was eliminated in the latest bill, even though it extended the production tax credit to 2029. Eliminating that differential means folks like Montana Renewables are more incented to produce RD as opposed to SAF. So that's a very simple fix that I hope that we're working on, and at the SAF Coalition at the federal level, we're trying to figure out. The other piece is here locally. The Washington State production tax credits up to $2 for SAF. That's amazing, but no one yet has taken advantage of that. And there are reasons, there are volumetric reasons why that hasn't yet happened, where we see other states leapfrog a little bit. You see Illinois, there's production and there's a tax credit associated with that. And so there's tweaks we can make here in Washington State too that will unlock new production. So those are simple policies, and I think they're marginal, to be quite frank. What we see in Europe is that stick approach: mandate, mandate, mandate. As an airline, I can't say that I want to be mandated to do anything, and it can only happen at the federal level. And obviously, with this current administration, that is not likely at all. And so we're sort of stuck in this voluntary phase of buying SAF where we can get someone else to pay for it. And that kind of growth is not going to help us meet our emissions targets. And so, we're in this place that we're kind of stuck. And yeah, I would love to see some sort of federal policy that was a better incentive, and maybe a really well thought out regulatory requirement. But we're just not in a place that those discussions are even happening, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I guess where back to the whole concept of the region controlling its own destiny, we one of the things to think about is, our region is cut off from the national fuel product supply system. We don't have pipelines that support our region that are connected to the rest of the region. I think additional infrastructure over time is critical. I think the other policy item to really think about is the ability to actually, even if we had the ability, even if one of our 5 refineries and refiners wanted to convert their factory, how long would it take them to do it, and how much would it cost them? And so there are regulatory barriers to actually doing that conversion that are major, major barriers to actually taking an existing refinery, which is the fastest path, as example by Montana Renewables, to producing sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel. So those are things we have to really look at. And then I guess I would just say we have this incredible law in the state of Washington called the Climate Commitment Act that passed a couple of years ago. And we raised nearly $1 billion a biennium to do decarbonization of various sectors. And I just want to put it on the table. I think that there's an opportunity for the collective region to use some of those funds to support refinery conversions in the region, to take some of that money in a non-dilutive fashion and support conversions of refineries and support the business models that are necessary to get them over the hurdle and in the business of producing renewables. So there's an idea for you.
Brian, you talked about the production credits. So we don't have those in Canada, and I think that's a really big missing piece of the policy puzzle. We just completed a economic and analysis of SAF production in British Columbia, and discovered sort of much like HEFA first, and then forest residue actually comes kind of in second, and then followed by municipal solid waste and other kind of feedstocks. And also echoed what other people have said, that we need to start investing in the technologies that are not HEFA like now, before we use up the HEPA feedstock. But we tested some policy scenarios in that, and kind of a headwinds and tailwinds kind of a economic scenario, and what comes out sort of as the winner that helps make SAF doable is a production tax credit and some sort of incentive, right? And so that's the combination that seems to be the one that works from a policy point of view. That's what we found for British Columbia. I think, you know, I can see you nodding. Like, I've seen lots of other studies where that's kind of what it says about the policy path.
I'll just add a little bit of flavor, maybe from a PNWER status or a viewpoint. One of the things that Kristen Brandt from Washington State University, she does a lot of research on policies related to clean fuels, and she's done a lot of analyses and has this model where she's looked at the efficacy of different policies. And her conclusion is that you always need a combination, that stacking these policies is really the only way. You need something from the production side and from the user side. And in fact, we are kicking off a meeting for a study that Kristen is leading that will look at the cross-border implications and how, you know, the different policies impact each other as we move these fuels across borders and create different incentives. So that's just my little add-on, that we are working together to try and solve this.
And Stephanie, since we've made you go last so many times, there's a great audience question that I think you can help us address, which is to think about the crossover impacts on maritime fuels, off-road fuels. As we develop this SAF infrastructure, are there opportunities to develop sustainable maritime fuels, off-road applications? What are some of those sort of intersections that might exist?
Great question. And I have to wonder if I know who in the audience asked this, but because the Port of Seattle has both a maritime and an aviation division, I've been working very closely with the maritime division to talk about where those intersections are. And in fact, the model of the alternative jet fuel working group that Senator Leas chairs, and that we basically develop across our industry policy recommendations every other year to the state legislature. And the maritime group is really looking at the models that we've created in the sustainable aviation fuel industry and using the lessons learned from that as well to figure out how they can create very similar types of, you know, sort of policy working groups and mechanisms. But what makes maritime fuel more interesting is they don't just use a Jet A, and so therefore can't just find one substitute. There is green methanol, there is green LNG, there is you know, they also have e-fuels and renewable diesel and a host of choices. And so it gets really interesting there in terms of figuring out what is a level playing field, whether you have the baseline be all just about the embodied or the carbon intensity of those fuels, and the incentives are just based on the carbon intensity across whichever one you use. So, you know, underpinning all of that, if I can just lean back on the last session, is of course hydrogen and green hydrogen, because most of these fuels, if not all of them, have some intersection with hydrogen. And figuring out how to get that component green as a sort of base in the production and the fuels is pretty critical to both of our industries. So we are working carefully together on this where there are intersections, but I do feel like the maritime industry has more challenges with figuring out, do you pick a winner at a particular port? And just speaking about the sort of, if it's about the region's economy, does the fuel follow what makes sense for the region? But how do you deal with international shipping lines that, you know, said, oh, we're going for green methanol, and how do you serve them? So that's a greater pickle to solve for a different session, but that's at least a little overview of how we're working together.
And Bruce, you're popular. There is a question specifically for you. Bruce, where does your feedstock come from, and could there be agricultural subsidies that could reduce the cost?
It's a great question, because if we back up to policy, I would take a close look at the farm practices. There's a lot more possible there than is really apparent. And I'll give you an example in a second, but I think as soon as the crops are worth more, you'll get those planted, and then the yields will go up, and then you'll get 2 harvests per year instead of 1, and so on. So there's actually a lot more feedstock available than the central planning mentality would tell you. If anybody remembers something called the Club of Rome and a book called The Limits to Growth, I will simply leave it as static planning will get this wrong every time, because you're missing the human creativity, you're missing the innovation, and you're missing the potential. So with that said, I saw a fascinating talk by a farmer at an ag summit that was organized by BASF. And he can do a lot more with soil than anybody knew, because, you know, I'm not a farmer. So if I say something that a farmer wants to correct, just jump right up and correct it. But, you know, we're using practices that are probably not substantially changed: tilling, planting, harvesting. Fertilizer has changed. Pesticides have changed. So yields are definitely up, but you can work on soil condition next. And I think if you can incent farmers with money and not accidentally disincent them with, please fill out this 172-page application in order to get the money, then you're probably going to have something really big going in the feedstock world. So here's my example. As far as I'm aware, we are the only ones to have made jet fuel out of camelina oil. What's camelina oil? Well, it's a non-food seed oil that grows off season. It likes to grow in the winter. It likes to grow in arid conditions. It grows all over this latitude in the Pacific Northwest, and we made SAF out of it. I don't have to have a conversation about food versus fuel. I don't have to have a conversation about alternate land use. We didn't compete for anything there. So things like that will bubble up as soon as we have a little bit of policy in the ag sector that opens the creativity.
I would jump up on that because you asked me to do that.
I did.
And I have been through your plant, and I'm a farmer. I've met you before, and I applaud what you're doing because I think it's, but for example, ethanol. If I were an Iowa or Minnesota farmer growing corn, I'd be all for ethanol. But ethanol takes more energy to make than it produces. It saves. The question is about camelina. Camelina has not been successfully grown in Montana to make it for us farmers. Absolutely. And you cannot get enough camelina or probably canola or anything else to fulfill your product, what you need to have. So my question is, what percentage of your product you get from other areas to make your finished product? But
So
some of these products, you were totally right. You've got to be able to afford it and make money on it. I can't grow camelina and lose money on it.
So
And I'm not asking for a subsidy from the federal government either.
by the power vested in me as the moderator, we'll give Bruce a quick response, and then it sounds like a really lovely happy hour conversation that the two of you and other folks that want to join in. But Bruce, if you want to just briefly respond.
I have much more to say after you give me 2 beers. But camelina is an example of a future state, not a current one. Totally agree. Let's park that for a second and just remember, people will create new ideas that Washington, D.C. hasn't thought of yet if we get out of their way. So I think all the solutions come back to local. So locally, we gather all of our feedstocks within about 1 day's freight, railroad freight from the refinery. I've run as much as 50% canola. We run Canadian canola. There's a lot more canola in Canada, as you're aware. It's like Canada makes 10 times as much canola oil as I could run in that facility. So we're not short. I just tapped into what they were exporting. Canola exports stayed home in North America to feed my plant in Montana. And then we send those renewable products back to YVR. We fueled WestJet that way. Domestically, we fueled JetBlue, Delta, and Alaskan Air. So, there's a lot of flexibility hiding in there. So we invested to be able to run any triglyceride molecule. That's the magic word. It comes in seed oils. It comes in animal products. Used cooking oil is just seed oil back around again. and corn oil from the on-purpose ethanol guys. We don't care. We pick whichever one is the highest value add. We commissioned our plant on 100% beef tallow the day we started it up. So we're agnostic. Because of that, I'm not worried about one plant in Montana, and I'm not worried about half a dozen plants in the Northwest. The failure of vision is when people try to scale this to 2050 and say, well, there's not enough feed. There is. People are going to find more feed when the price of these crops go up. That is exactly what happened to your example of corn ethanol. So back in the aughts decade, ethanol won this, okay? Ethanol's replaced 10% of the US gasoline pool, and that works. And I don't hear anybody complaining about, well, I probably have heard my wife complaining about the price of ears of corn in the supermarket, but it's not the end of the world. I want to stay with distillates, and that means kerosene and diesel fuel. And kerosene, of course, is going to be SAF. We will make it out of anything. That condition is going to hold up for longer than people think. We're not going to replace 2/3 of the jet fuel in the world by 2050, no matter how many studies get published. What we are going to do is find the cost-effective solutions that win in the market. And the federal government does have a role to play in technology forcing. I sure hope they stop short of technology selection, thank you. But if they push this along with incentives, we will have more of this going on. Now, you want that in your backyard? Then we come to the local. So BC is doing what will work. Illinois is, Minnesota is. A local incentive will pull a lot of things into alignment.
Fascinating. Thank you for that interchange. We're going to shift directions to another audience question about, as the industry shifts towards sustainable fuels, how are labor standards, union jobs, workforce training a part of that? And how do we ensure that as we build this sector, they're not just green jobs, but good paying, in the questioner's mind, union jobs? How does workforce and workforce training or workforce development labor standards fit into this as we grow the industry?
I'll go first and I'll go quick. Montana is a right to work state, but our hourly workforce is union represented. Most US refineries are. The average payroll, salary, wages, everything, benefits, all fully loaded, is about $140,000 a head. We already have the high paying jobs.
Tim?
Yeah, some of the best jobs in the state are refinery operator jobs. And you just need to look no further than 5 refineries in the state of Washington, and the operational systems within those refineries are very similar to those operational systems that you would find over at Montana Renewables. Not exactly the same, but extremely comparable. And those jobs are just as valuable in a renewable fuel operation as they are in a fossil fuel operation. So that's the hope, is those converted jobs, just move right into additional work for the existing refining operators.
Stephanie, you and Wendy have alluded to the cross-border collaboration. What are some of the opportunities for cross-border collaboration between US and Canadian jurisdictions? Is there the possibility to streamline SAF development, align regulations, build shared infrastructure? As you look into the crystal ball, what do you see as possibilities for cross-border collaboration?
I'll throw a couple of ideas out. I think one of the areas that we already do collaborate, we actually have another Cascadia, just because we love the name Cascadia, another group that is the Cascadia Airports, and we developed an MOU between Portland PDX and ourselves and YVR to really explore that very question as it related to sustainable aviation fuel, but also a lot of other things that our airports share. And one of the critical things that we understood about each other is that we all get a lot of fuel from one of those refineries in Washington State. And so are there things that we can leverage about how we are already getting our fuel that we could then, basically have that translate to how sustainable aviation fuel gets into that same system? So that's one of the things we've explored. We have not got a Eureka solution at this moment, but we do see that there are commonalities in our supply chains. So I think there's still more opportunity for collaboration there. I think I've alluded to in the policy space, we've talked a lot about our equivalent low carbon fuel standards or clean fuel standards, what yours does, what does yours, and we really use that more to learn from each other about what's working, what's not working, and have that, and we sort of elevate that through our own existing channels. But I am curious to see, as we do this exploration for this next study with Washington State University, and that's through the FAA Ascent program, to really see if there's other things we can unlock as it relates to the supply chain and to just bringing more staff into the region. So I'm not sure what the answer will be, but maybe a future PNWER panel we can express that. So.
And if we look through the maple flavored crystal ball, what do we see?
I'm gonna get, I was gonna say, I'm gonna get stuck with that. Okay, I think the other thing we learned in talking to each other is not only about the supply chains, but then it's we can produce neat SAF, but then it's got to get blended somewhere. And so that whole question about blending and where that makes sense and how, and like, do we have a one big blending facility that everyone can access, or like, how is that going to happen? I think is one question that we're still kind of exploring and try and learning from. And then I'm going to go back to the communications again, because I think that I think that SAF isn't well understood by the traveling public. And so if we want that demand and people that willingness to pay, is that we need to help and understand. And particularly, I think right now in the kind of very heightened sensitivity around greenwashing, and then the reluctance of some companies to talk about what they're doing. So what we would call green hushing, where companies aren't talking about it. Like, we need to get out there with really good information so that passengers understand what it is, and then feel maybe more comfortable about making that commitment to do their part to decarbonize.
Brilliant. We have an audience question that points out that annual global consumption of aviation fuel in 2019 was 433 billion liters. So 5% of that would be roughly 22 billion liters. And I'll start with you, Ryan. What's a realistic timeline to be able to produce this kind of volume? When could we see 5% of aviation fuel coming from SAF? What would be our theoretical? What's your crystal ball say in terms of our ability to meet a timeline like that?
That's a good question. I think globally, I don't have the answer. I think nationally, the prior administration set a 10% goal for 2030, which was 3 billion gallons for the imperial system here. I don't think we're going to get close to that, to be quite frank. So half of that, certainly possible. There's a lot of investments being made, but at the same time, you can't take a huge step forward alone. And so building partnerships becomes tremendously important as well. I meet with my peer airline sustainability leaders every quarter, where we discuss these opportunities and these challenges and try to figure out how do we collaborate to incent the market. This work, just because it's taken some blows in the last few months, is not stopping. It is something that we are investing time, effort, resources, and money into figuring out. And maybe it's not, by an arbitrary round number 2030 that we're going to hit a specific amount of gallons, but the work marches on. And I know that I work with all of the folks up here, and Tim mentioned the Cascadia Accelerator here in the Pacific Northwest. There are things that we can do to unlock it. And so I'm excited about the future, but it'll be a few years before we hit those big audacious goals because of these roadblocks that we got to get around.
2030, anybody else want to weigh in on what a time frame might be to get to 5%?
I mean, at the pace we're at, it's going to be 2050. We have to really, dig deep and do something unique, which is what Minneapolis has done with their SAF accelerator, which is what Washington wants to do with the region, with our SAF accelerator at our institute. In order to do all of that, in order to reach these 2030 numbers and 2050 numbers, we have to unlock a number of new refining systems that have yet to be fully commercialized on an economic basis. They're technically viable. They're economically not viable. There's work to be done there. So, it's really all about, look, there's never been an energy transition in the world. Go check my history without the leadership of government. And if you just want to look at the United States Navy as an example, from wind to coal, from coal to diesel, from diesel to nuke, those nukes resulted in the first civilian reactors that the United States and the world ever used. So that energy transition happened because of government leadership. And until you have that, the problem is almost too big to solve, but just being realistic, that's kind of what I think.
So between 2030 and 2050 is when we'll get to 5%. What role can PNWER and this region play in steering us towards the 2030? As we think about PNWER and we think about our region on the global stage, what can we do to help steer us to Ryan's optimistic goal?
They all looked at Stephanie. I mean, I think where we have the power is the power of working together, right? Like I can as YVR, like I'm one voice in the choir, but when you look up here, even on the panel, like the expanse of where we are across the ecosystem of the supply chain, then that's where we start to be able to advocate and really have power. And I think I go to a lot of SAF panels and talks, and it's really nice that I'm not up here like arguing with the supplier or arguing, with the airline or anything. Like you can hear the consistency of kind of even that, what were the policies? Like right away, we were all like, like we know kind of what these things are that we need to do with the policies. I think the power of something at PNWER is to help organize and to help us really have that consistent voice and that persistent voice, because this is going to be, it is a difficult problem. And so we need that persistence to stick with it, especially right now with like changing political kind of relationships and what's going on in the world. Like we really need to stick with it together. And I know Stephanie and she said like we've worked together a long time, and we really like, there's sometimes we're just like, I just need a hug because I'm working on SAF and I just need a little bit of, and just helping each other with that. I really think is one of the powers of working together.
Bruce?
Agree, a regional book and claim system for the emissions. So I can stop transporting things in rail cars past 16 airports to get to the one you wanted to fuel at.
Yeah. Tim, can you give us the 30 seconds on what a regional book and claim system would be?
Well, book and claim is a system that we use right now to trade natural gas. So you can put natural gas in Vermont, and you can use that natural gas credit in the state of Washington through a book and claim accounting methodology, well-known, very transparent, something that should be adopted as a regional basis to really drive SAF demand. It's a great idea.
We have a fact question. What is the price of a gallon of regular aviation fuel, and what is the price of a gallon of SAF right now?
It's a trick question. You can't ask that without saying where. I'll start you off with the publicly visible website from Signature Aviation, which has got a lot of FBOs, fixed base operators, meaning that's where the Learjets get fueled. When that pilot signs that receipt for the guy that just put fuel into his wing, the fossil jet is $6. If they called it renewable instead, and if memory serves, that was $8. They're not substantially different delivered into the Learjet. However, at the very same time, the language most people use is the wholesale price of jet. And a lot of times they look at Los Angeles, which is probably the deepest liquid market. That same number in LA right now is probably $1.50 a gallon. So there's the service component to have the fuel where you wanted it. And that's going to take me back real quick to this transportation dead horse there. Stipulate I just kicked it one more time.
Ryan, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think those numbers are directionally right. And obviously we buy a lot more fuel than the Learjet guy, but to us, it's also what kind of SAF. So the SAF you can get delivered today from Montana Renewables is a couple bucks more than Jet A. The kind that we're talking about into the future, power to liquid, ATJ, many more dollars added to that, $5, $10, $15 more per gallon. When you think about what it costs to run an airline, a third of your flight, the cost is fuel. So if I'm multiplying that by 3, 4, 5, 6x, how are you feeling about that price of ticket now? And that's really where the challenge is.
All right, here's an easy question, I think. Raise your hand if you think there's value to an ongoing dialogue across borders with key stakeholders in the SAF ecosystem. Okay, good news, because PNWER is going to host a meeting potentially in September. So if you're interested in this ongoing cross-border dialogue with these thoughtful, amazing people, Matt Morrison and the team would gladly take your volunteerism. Let us finish with sort of a round robin as we think about not just joining this meeting in September or in the fall. What is one step that we can each take in the next year to strengthen regional alignment and unlock the potential of SAF in our shared region? And let's just go sort of down the line again. What's one step in the next year that we can take?
I think you can have the book and claim running in a year.
I would say share what you know about this now that you've learned about SAF. Part of this is educational. It's a new technology relatively to the airlines. If you're booking on Alaska Air, I would love if you earned EQMs and helped us along our journey. So that's definitely a step you could take.
I'm going to go with book and claim, but just to be different, I'm going to say unlock remove technical barriers to getting fuels into existing airports like SeaTac.
I was going to go with book and claim too. I would say the one thing that we can do, I think, is keep connecting with each other. I think we're in different parts of the supply chain, and it's really, you know, when you're trying to kind of push and pull and get them all kind of right, that requires a lot of engagement and a lot of conversation and a lot of sharing. And so I'm encouraged by that. And I think we need to just make sure that we are working together.
At the end of the line, I'm going to borrow from a few other people's comments, and Tim, with respect to the infrastructure, our study showed that getting SAF into SeaTac Airport and blended into the pipeline, which is the cheapest way to get it in, has some significant challenges. And right now, my friends at YVR and PDX are receiving fuels and have unlocked some technical challenges, and I think there's some learning to be had from that can sort of feed into our infrastructure 2.0 study that we're going to be doing through the Cascadia Accelerator to really hopefully get the right key to unlock that for SeaTac Airport specifically.
I thought that was going to take like 5 more minutes. So we're going to get you to happy hour a little bit faster. We're going to give you 5 more minutes to grill Bruce about Camelina in Montana and all the other topics that you may have. But can we start with a round of applause for this incredible panel? And again, if this piqued your curiosity, reach out to the PNWER staff. We would love to have as many voices as possible to continue this dialogue into the fall. Thank you very much and enjoy the reception.